So if you're in Australia, good afternoon. If you're in China, good morning, and welcome back, John Lander. I think you were one of my very early interviews when I first started doing this. So it's like having an old friend back on the show. Thank you very much for joining us. We're going to talk about two things today. One is I'll just bring up this picture here, the challenge of communist China as presented by the ASPI strategist. And then we're going to have a little chat about the visit of Li Chang, who left Australia yesterday. So welcome, John Lander, and thank you for joining us on the show again. Tell us about the communist China threat.
Well, yeah, thank you for welcoming me back. I feel I've sort of neglected matters for some time. This paper relates back to a paper I wrote at least 2 years ago, in which I talk about the fiction of the China threat, endeavoring to explain how China does not represent a military threat against Australia. And I made the point back then, I think it was in 2021, that the real challenge, which Pezzullo also addresses, is not so much a military threat as the gradual undermining of the status of the US dollar as the global currency. That status, of course, underpins the strength of the United States dollar and the United States economy. If the world ceases to use the United States dollar as reserve currency and the currency for international transactions, it loses its value.
Yeah,
it will cease to have any real value for the rest of the world. And things like US Treasury bonds and so on will likewise lose value. And I'm no economist, but everything that I've read on the subject admits that the cessation of the role of the US dollar as the international currency for transactions and trade would result in the collapse of the US economy. So this is, I think, really the motivation behind everything that the United States is doing. And I think they rather mistakenly feel that they can use military might to hold back the tide of international economic and financial transformation, rather than, I think, seeing that this transformation is now inevitable and seeking ways to work in with it to protect their own national economic interest. However, getting on to Pezzullo's article, the first thing I would say was, of course, as you said, no coincidence. It was clearly designed to try to influence the meetings between our Prime Minister and China's Prime Minister. And in fact, the article refers to the visit of Li Chang at one point. But I find it, my immediate reaction was, this is the most supercilious, arrogant, specious, hypocritical article about China that I've ever read. It's quite extraordinary, the sort of high horse approach that Pezzullo takes. The constant implication throughout the article is that China is inferior to the rest of us, that China needs the support of the civilized world to assist it in its development, which of course is absolutely laughable, because China has demonstrated time and time again that it's well in advance of the rest of us. And you referred to the fact that he listed a whole series of demands or proposals for things that China should do to help.
I was curious about those proposals because when I counted them, I found there were 14 of them.
Yes,
And I thought perhaps that's not a coincidence. What do you think
that's
about that?
not either. No, but the obvious purpose of the paper is, and then the central purpose is, and which is my aha moment when I got to it, is that it's clearly designed to promote the US objective of maintaining United States supremacy, global supremacy, which is, of course, the prime directive of US foreign policy and has been since way back before Ronald Reagan.
Yep.
It is the driver of US foreign and defence policy. And Pazuello says we, that is Australia, have a stake in this contest playing out such that US primacy, including military superiority, is maintained. Well, that's a statement of core US policy, and whether we have a real interest in it or not is still very, very much open to doubt. Just as a sideline, I was extremely disappointed a few weeks ago when Penny Wong at the, again, ASPI promoted so-called Defending Australia conference actually said the same thing, that Australia has an interest in upholding the international rules-based order, which is a euphemism for saying maintaining United States primacy. So that's really the purpose of the whole article. He keeps referring to China's belligerence.
That was going to be my first question, actually. It's in the opening line, the problem with dealing with belligerent communist China. Is China belligerent?
Well, he seems to be completely incapable of adducing any examples of China's belligerence, apart from the now very worn-out tropes of Xinjiang, Hong Kong, Taiwan, Tibet, all of which are, in fact, integral parts of China's sovereign territory, a fact that we acknowledged in 1972 when we recognized the People's Republic of China. We very clearly acknowledged that, in particular, that Taiwan was a province of China, and we recognized that the government of the People's Republic of China was the government of the whole of China. And that was stated in the joint communique on the recognition of the People's Republic of China. And a joint communique in international law serves as a kind of binding contract. It has legal force. So until until Australia actually abrogates that agreement, we are bound by it, and it makes it very clear that we, Australia, are legally bound to respect the fact that there is only one China, position which we took, of course, before the advent of the People's Republic of China, when we used to recognize the ROC. We recognized the ROC in 1941. China didn't become the People's Republic of China until 1949. And when in 1941, of course, Taiwan was militarily occupied by Japan, who was forced to hand it back to China at the end of the Second World War, and it handed it back to the then government of the whole of China, which was the Republic of China, the Nationalist Party, which, as a result of the Civil War, finally fled to Taiwan and established itself as a rump government on the island of Taiwan, still claiming to represent the legitimate government of the whole of China, which of course
they did for a further
and Australia
nearly
agreed to that
years.
from 1941 up until 1972, which is quite a long time. And it was always on the basis that Taiwan was an integral part of China's sovereign territory. When we transferred our recognition to the People's Republic of China, we did so on the basis that Taiwan's status had not in any material way changed. And the constant reference by the Western propaganda to Taiwan, the self-ruled island that Beijing claims but has never possessed, is completely false.
Can I just, for the purposes of clarity, can I just clarify something here? You were part of the DFAT. I don't think it was called DFAT at the time, but you were part of the group that actually wrote the policy for the recognition of the People's Republic of China. So this is not just your opinion. You actually lived through this experience. Is that right?
Yes, absolutely. I was very much involved. It was the Department of External Affairs when I was in it was nothing like as big as it is today. And so the team that was nutting out the instructions to be sent to our ambassador in Paris, who was negotiating with the Chinese ambassador on this subject, was really only a maximum of 5 people.
Wow.
I was the junior, and as always in all bureaucracies, the junior is given the responsibility of making the first draft, which then gets hacked at by the next up the line and the next up the line and the next up the line until we have a final version. But so I remember very clearly the constant argument back and forth, particularly between Canberra and Washington, and also, of course, our then ambassador in Taipei, which was trying to devise a form of two China policy, trying to work out a way in which we could have our cake and eat it too, and have relations with both official political relations with both Taiwan and mainland China. And it was the sticking point which made the negotiations drag on for a long time. But the Chinese, the PRC representative, was adamant on that one point, conceded a great deal else, including that Australia could continue to have its existing trade relationship with Taiwan, that it could have people-to-people relations with Taiwan, it could have education exchanges and tourism exchanges, etc. The one thing that China would not concede was that we could have official political relations with Taiwan, because that would be tantamount to
basically two countries,
allowing Taiwan to be recognized as an independent country. And of course, for very important strategic and security reasons, that's something that China will never allow, and they have made it very clear ever since. Their policy with regard to Taiwan has not really changed since since they came to power in 1949, and certainly the explicit enunciation of their policy has not changed since they put it to us in 1972. And that is that China is dedicated to the peaceful reintegration of Taiwan into the life of the motherland, but reserves the right to use force to prevent any attempt to remove Taiwan from China's sovereign territory. That has not changed, and every statement that has been made in recent years relating to Taiwan, like at the 20th National People's Congress, has reiterated the same language. The Tsulo refers to China's potential use of force against Taiwan by 2027.
2027, yeah. And that number, that seems to come from nowhere. Where is 2027 from?
It came from
US.
the US admiral, whose name escapes me at the moment, who said we can expect war to break out by 2027. It's purely a date that was set by America, possibly in the awareness of the fact that China's military development, and particularly its naval development, would by 2030 reach the point where the United States would be unable to contain China to its within its periphery, and that if the United States were to be able to best China militarily, it would have to do so before 2030. So this is why I think that date of 2027 sort of emerged and got bandied about. But I have not seen in any Chinese policy statement, not even in Xi Jinping's address to the PLA on the 100th anniversary of the formation of the PLA, any reference to a specific date. What happened in that address, much to Kevin Rudd's alarm, was that Xi, for the first time, actually explicitly designated the United States as an adversary against which China might have to go to war to protect itself. That his address to the PLA was basically saying that the United States has very clearly set its face against China's development, and particularly against China's developing cooperation with other countries, using military means, such that eventually an attack by the United States has to be factored in, and therefore the PLA needs to be prepared for war. It did not say that the PLA needs to be prepared to go to war, but it needs to be prepared
from a
war, which he saw as coming from the United States. That was immediately spun to say that Xi Jinping has basically planning to go to war against the United States and against the United States interests.
It seems everything that Xi Jinping says when he is defensive about China, and it's all defensive, is then immediately turned into an offensive statement. And I don't mean offensive in the terms of his wording, in the terms of we are going to attack somewhere.
Yes.
Yes. Yeah.
So I think it's important to probably just briefly revise what he actually said on the subject of Taiwan. As recently as the end of 2023. He said, the people on both sides of the Taiwan Strait are members of one and the same family. I sincerely hope that our compatriots on both sides of the strait will work together with a unity of purpose to jointly foster the lasting prosperity of the Chinese nation. There is no way that that can be taken as a statement of belligerence.
No.
And at the 20th Congress, which is the most important policy statements regarding China's policy for the next 5 years, China is dedicated to peace, development, cooperation, and mutual benefit. We will strive to safeguard world peace and development as we pursue our own development, and we will make greater contributions to world peace and development through our own development. So that is a statement of China's commitment to the sort of peace, amity, and cooperation that Mike Pezzullo, in his paper, says China should commit itself to. So they'd already done that a few years ago.
Yeah. So let me play the devil's advocate here and ask you, why then has China built up its military so strongly, and it now has more ships than the US Navy, it has a bigger army, it's building hypersonic missiles, it's doing all the things that America says are belligerence? Why do they need to do that?
I think we need to simply say Obama's pivot to Asia.
Right.
At that point, the United States ranged 60% of its naval force along the coast of China, just off the coast of China, in so-called international waters, but within striking range of all of China's key ports. The lifelines of the Chinese economy are all within striking distance of the United States naval presence. Any reasonable, rational strategic analyst on the Chinese side would come to the conclusion that China needed to develop an ability to counter that. And the timeline of the development of China's military capability, and particularly its naval capability, is one where each new development has come after an increase or a significant action by the United States in relation to China. Any country that is surrounded by 400 foreign military bases, all aimed at it, plus an overwhelming naval presence just virtually within spitting distance of its shores, would be insane not to develop a military capability comparable to that with which it is faced. This is, of course, an argument that is now being made in Australia by people like Pezzullo, that Australia must develop its military capability in face of the threat from China, a threat which, of course, is non-existent. China has never, despite the hostile language that Australia has used about China and the hostile activities that Australia has engaged in with regard to China, China has never, in any of its statements regarding Australia, ever used any hostile language. It has never designated Australia as an enemy. It has never evinced the slightest interest in militarily attacking Australia or attacking Australia in any other way. It has expressed an interest in investing in Australia's development to serve its own interests, of course, which of course is why any country invests in any other country. But it has always emphasized peaceful cooperation. This is taken by the China hawks in Australia as simply being doublespeak, hidden behind all this.
We can justify the China hawk name for Pezzullo based on he thinks that Australia has misread China and is too timid against China.
That's right. But I think we need to always bear in mind that, firstly, Pezzullo is now working for ASPI, the Australians. This paper is published under the logo of ASPI, the Australian Strategic Policy Institute, which I prefer to call the American Subversive Propaganda Institute.
Yes.
Because it is significantly funded by weapons manufacturers and arms dealers and the State Department and the Defense Department of the United States. It's notionally funded by the Australian government, but the amount of funding that ASPI receives from the United States, from those various agencies, is very significant and extremely influential. And ASPI has a long record now of strenuously promoting United States interests and United States perception of the strategic or geostrategic balance, as it calls it, in the Indo-Pacific. So he is what in other circumstances, in other places, are called a shill.
That's what I get called.
Yeah, and he is his comments about human rights certainly got my hackles up. He was described by a friend of mine as one of the most sinister Australian government officials, who was actually forced to resign because of his unprecedented attempts to interfere in the process of appointment of ministers, to try to force the selection of ministers into the cabinet who were in tune with United States policy. He should have received a much more severe punishment than simply being dismissed. But of course,
my understanding, I've got the ABC report on another screen right here, and it actually, the ABC report headline, not that I guarantee the ABC report is accurate, it says powerful Home Affairs boss Mike Pezzullo sacked after investigation into back channel lobbying. So this is a guy who actually needs the money now. He's unemployed, or was for a short period.
Which is why he. Again, I'll find the reference. He says, on the hard security side, an integrated national strategy would include building rapidly the military power that we would need to defend Australia in a Pacific war, transforming AUKUS into an Australia-US warfighting alliance, and realizing the technology benefits of AUKUS more quickly, building security networks in the Indo-Pacific region, etc., etc. That's a promotion of the interests of the military-industrial complex.
Exactly what it is.
And of course, it is the United States military-industrial complex and weapons manufacturers who are paying Mike Pezzullo his remuneration for writing these sorts of articles. And he keeps talking about resisting Chinese regional hegemony, which China has never sought.
No.
It is, again, a formal statement of Chinese policy in the 20th National People's Congress, which renounces the pursuit of hegemony.
Shared values and shared future for all.
For the one reason that China perceives the pursuit of hegemony as being counterproductive, that is ultimately destructive of the interests of the country that is attempting to pursue hegemony. And I think today we can see how true that is in the case of the United States, because more and more the world is moving away from and getting out from under United States dominance. There are the BRICS, Brazil, Russia, India, China, and South Africa, which was founded as a loose economic cooperation partnership, has significantly expanded. It now has 10 additional members. including such countries as Egypt and Iran, and Saudi Arabia, I think, has just about confirmed its accession to it as well.
Saudi Arabia has just a few days ago started adapting the international settlements through Enbridge, which is kind of BRICS related, but kind of BRICS separated. But it's the new digital bank currency, which takes away from what they call the petrodollar. And that I just had a chat about that this morning with Fernando, because it's actually fake news, but it is news that Saudi Arabia have done this.
Well, it's a very, very big news that Saudi Arabia has officially, as of the 13th of this month, I think, declined to renew the agreements with the United States establishing the role of the dollar as the sole currency for trading in oil, and has made very clear that China is now the largest importer of Saudi Arabia's oil exports, and it has made clear that it intends to do that trade in bilateral currencies, the Saudi Rial and the Chinese Yuan, and completely bypassing the dollar as a medium of exchange. That is a very, very significant move. It gets us away from the Pasullo article a bit, but
it does.
But I think
yes, it's been misreported as being the end of the dollar and the end of the petrodollar. It's not any of those things. And anybody who wants more detail on that, go look at the video that myself and Fernando made just 3 hours ago. Let's come back to Pasullo. I want to read one of the statements.
I think that development is another indicator of the way in which of the real China challenge, not the one that Pasullo is
the economic challenge.
But the real China challenge is the fact that it is, in fact, developing methods of dealing with the rest of the world. And we've got to remember that the West is not the rest of the world. There's only 13% of the world. But all of the rest of the world, outside of the American controlled system, it's not yet fully detached from the Western international financial and trade system, but it is increasingly becoming detached. And along with it, of course, are all those other countries that are clearly dissatisfied with the existing system. 59 other countries have, in fact, now indicated that they wish to join BRICS.
Yep.
Algeria, Morocco, Nigeria, Chad, Equatorial Guinea, Eritrea, Senegal, Zimbabwe, South Sudan, Azerbaijan, Bangladesh, Bahrain, Indonesia, Kazakhstan, Kuwait, Palestine, Pakistan, Syria, Thailand, Vietnam, Sri Lanka, Turkey. Turkey, I think, is very significant.
Yep.
And in Latin America, Bolivia, Venezuela, and Honduras. A lot of those countries are very, very populous. They're not small countries. They're very, very significant portions of the world population. And many of them, countries like Indonesia and Thailand and Vietnam, of course, are part of the 10-nation ASEAN. They're also powerhouse economies now. They're growing quite significantly. In fact, the combined GDP of ASEAN will outstrip the G7 in a few years' time. And they're all partnering up with BRICS, which is basically joining forces with Russia and China. Malaysia has just announced this. So,
there you go.
Thank you, Sui.
I didn't know that until just now.
No, I didn't either. I knew about the others.
The other thing is the RCEP.
Sorry.
Most of these countries, particularly in this region, are part of that Regional Comprehensive Economic Partnership, including Australia, the RCEP. And
Yes.
that's something else. So we've got ASEAN, we've got RCEP, we've got BRI, we've got BRICS, and then we've got the G7. And it seems like the Eurasian Economic Union as well, with Kazakhstan, and they've just recently signed a free trade agreement with Iran. So we've got lots of things happening in this part of the world.
Yes, from which Australia is divorcing itself.
Attempting to, yes.
I see is completely insane.
Well, let me read one paragraph, or not one paragraph, one sentence from the Pizzulo thing that I'd love your comment on. It says, we need to derive an integrated national strategy that's organized around sustaining structural competition with China by a US-led West, with the ever-present possibility of confrontation being factored into every calculation. Who's paying him to say this?
Oh, guess. You've got one guess.
Okay, it starts with M and ends in C, the military-industrial complex. It really is the most outrageous statement that I've seen in an article. I mean, this is a 5 or 6 page article. It's well worth a read. I'll put a link into the description when we've finished. So if anyone, and ASPI will be very pleased, because it will be one of their most downloaded articles, or most read or clicked on articles, but for the wrong reasons. The US-led West is where Australia, according to Pizzulo, needs to align itself.
I'm just looking for that sentence.
It's on the page before the picture of Mao. John, the picture of Mao, and it go up 3 paragraphs. The paragraph starts with the word moreover and finishes with that sentence that I just read.
Yeah, found it. Because I thought I'd made some notes there, but my notes are related to just beyond there, particularly his recommendation that Australia will have to devise such a strategy. Mm-hmm. Government structures will need to be redesigned. A dedicated policy planning staff will be required to devise a national strategy, which would then have to be announced or presented to the Australian community as the centrepiece of a national security statement. So he's more or less recommending that Australia declare war. And what I found even personally, I found even more insulting was the opening sentence of the next paragraph directly under the picture of Chairman Mao. He says the China challenge cannot be managed effectively by diplomats.
I've marked the same paragraph, same line, and I said, well, who then? It was my question. Next question for you. If it can't be managed by diplomats, who manages it? And there is only one answer. Again, the military. He's saying this is a defense issue. This is an intelligence community issue. This is not an issue that diplomats should be handling.
That's right. And of course, the Five Eyes network within Canberra, which includes ASPI, has basically taken over the formulation of Australian foreign and defence policy anyway, already. What Penny Wong really needs to be doing is wresting control of foreign policy back. Foreign policy should be determined by the foreign ministry and the foreign minister in conjunction with the prime minister, and defence should be operating purely in support of policies that are devised independent of narrow military interests, which usually involve large amounts of money. So
it's very interesting in Australia right now. We have Penny Wong, who is the quiet diplomat. I think we can all agree she's very quietly doing things, but I wish there was a little bit more around what she's doing. But then we have Richard Marles, and they're sitting either side of the Prime Minister, and they're completely opposing. Their ideology seems to me to be completely opposed. One is
Well, that was
pro-trade in China, the other is anti or pro-war and anti-China.
Well, that is why I was so disappointed in her statement at the Defending Australia conference, because it looked very much as though she had basically capitulated to the American position when she said that Australia's interest lies in upholding the international rules-based order and support and ensuring continued strategic balance of forces in the Asia Pacific or the Indo Pacific. I've forgotten which one she used.
Now.
But the strategic balance of forces at the moment is a very significant imbalance in the United States' favour, and that's the way they want to keep it. And that's what Pezzullo says. He's quite explicit about it. That Australia's interest lies in ensuring that the United States maintains its supremacy, including its military supremacy, in our region.
So can I ask a question here? Do you think that this is a willing policy, or do you think that the US holds economic coercion, financial, and of course, we've talked about the defense coercion. I have this idea that Australia has to go along just because if they don't go along, America will do one of two things: either completely invade Australia and take it over, or they'll pull the rug out from under Australia and leave them abandoned and exposed. And maybe that's the fear. What do you think?
The former, I think, is unlikely, and most people wouldn't really regard that as a possibility, although I wouldn't put it past them. The United States has never shied away from militarily taking over countries or destroying countries that it disagrees with. You only have to look at Iraq, which was its best friend in the Middle East when it was fighting Iran when I was in Tehran, and it subsequently became its worst enemy. And the United States mounted the shock and awe campaign, which completely obliterated modern day Iraq and killed well over 500,000 people. So I don't think that fate is in store for Australia, because I think the United States has other methods. I've pointed this out before. It's not mine. It was done by Clinton Fernandez. But
yes,
this chart, the blue lines represent the degree of American majority shareholding in Australian companies.
In Australia's top 20 companies, 15 of them are fully controlled by US. 3 of them are more than 30% controlled, and 2 of them are Australian. And those top 20 companies make up about 60% of Australia's economy.
Yes, and most significantly, the big 4 banks, as they are always
all in there.
Are all in there. Very significant majority shareholding by America. BlackRock, I think, in particular, is one of the most important, and BlackRock, of course, is the main driver of war in most countries that it wants eventually to establish a stake in. It's no accident that BlackRock has now purchased most of the national assets of Ukraine in terms of agricultural farmland and industrial capacity and so on. BlackRock always follows in the footsteps of the military.
Yeah.
And in fact, I think drives a lot of the military decisions. But Australia is in no position to really run completely counter to United States policy. as was seen back in the days of Whitlam, with whom I served, when he intimated that he would not renew the agreement for the Pine Gap surveillance installation, the Marshall Green, the then the US ambassador in Canberra, there is an exchange of secret telegrams, which has now been declassified and is in the public domain in Foreign Affairs archives. He received instructions from Washington that the United States was prepared to use military force if Whitlam won the election that was coming up, which he lost. The reason the election came about, of course, was because the United States cut Australia off from pretty much all sources of international finance, which, of course, led the Whitlam government to try to borrow money by some more unconventional channels, and basically led to its downfall and eventual loss at the polls. So the United States plan to use military force to keep Pine Gap open didn't eventuate because the political cum financial measures were sufficient to remove the immediate threat to Pine Gap. And no Prime Minister or no government since then has ever dared to even suggest that Pine Gap represents a liability for Australia, which of course it does. It represents not just a liability in the sense that it's a possible target in the event of war, but it is a liability in the sense of the extent to which it diminishes our sovereign independence and a capacity to make independent decisions. And it undermines significantly our standing in the world because of its contribution to such things as the slaughter of the Palestinians in Gaza, targeting information and other significant surveillance information is channeled from satellites through Pine Gap to the Israeli Death Force. And likewise, the IDF, the Israeli Death Force.
New name.
Yeah. And of course, likewise, such information is channeled through to the Ukrainians as well. So already Pine Gap makes Australia complicit in the genocide in Gaza, and it makes Australia a co-belligerent in the war against Russia.
Yeah.
And of course, it's pretty much at United States' behest that Australia has also reinforced its co-belligerent status by supplying Ukraine with significant amounts of military equipment. I've forgotten what the figure is now, but it's several billions of dollars
yes.
contributed to Ukraine to help sustain its losing battle against Russia. Sulo talks about how it would be necessary for China to, in order for China to improve its peaceful position in the world, would be to cease supporting Russia's illegal and immoral invasion of Ukraine. And that it should put limits on its no limits alliance with Russia. Well, try the other one. There's no way, I think, that you could describe Russia's limited military operation in eastern Ukraine as either illegal or immoral. Under international law, a country is in fact permitted to militarily attack any other country that is threatening its territory or indeed even its survival. And Russia made it clear for at least 7 years, if not longer, that the installation of NATO weaponry and the training by NATO and the expansion by NATO of Ukraine's military presented a potentially existential threat to Russia, not just a threat to Russian territory, but to an extent a threat to its survival. So the conditions for Russia to use military means to defend itself were set in place between 2014 and 2022. And in fact, in 2022, a month before Russia launched its military operation, a White House briefing, press briefing, stated that the United States, in company with its European partners, would weaken Russia to the point where it could have no influence on the international stage. That seems to me to amount to what any reasonable nation would regard as an existential threat. So it's hard to characterize Russia's military operation as illegal, and it's equally difficult to characterize it as immoral, given that one of the most important justifications for it on the ground was to protect the Russian-speaking population in eastern Ukraine from 10 years of military assault by Ukraine's own defense force against them. The purpose of which was stated by particularly the Azov battalion, which was incorporated into Ukraine's defense force once the Americans had succeeded in overthrowing President Yanukovych and installing puppet Zelensky. The Azov battalion made it very clear that the purpose of their bombardment of the Donbass region, Donetsk and Luhansk, was to drive out the Russian-speaking population, which is coming close to fitting
ethnic
into
cleansing.
the definition of ethnic cleansing, if not genocide. So, from both a legal and a moral perspective, I think Russia could very easily make the case that it was acting both legally and morally. Whereas
I noticed Pizzullo forgot the word unprovoked, which will probably cost him a few brownie points.
Yeah, unprovoked. The idea that he has here that unless China puts limits on its alliance with Russia, it will embolden Russia to further threaten the peace of the Euro-Atlantic region.
Well, Russia's made no indications that it wants to go any further than where it is.
That's right. There is absolutely no evidence whatsoever that Russia has any ambition to invade Western Europe. It's in fact stated many times that would be a very stupid thing to do. So again, I think the notion that China, by limiting its cooperation with Russia, economic and political and so on, would somehow embolden Russia to attack Western Europe and further is quite laughable. The next point.
Let me come back to this. I've got a question. Oh, not that one. Sorry. I got a question that came up here just a few minutes ago. What can little Australia do to get away from this dominance? Is there anything Australia can do?
I think the questioner could invert the words. What little can Australia do to get away from the dominance of the US? There is very little that Australia can do to get away from the dominance of the US, unless it is far more courageous than it has hitherto shown itself to be. Australia has always, Petullo talks about Australia's timidity towards China. Again, which I find quite laughable, because Australia has always been extraordinarily timid with regard to the United States. And again, it brings me back to the days of my past. Many years ago, in 1972, I've referred to this before, but I think it bears reiterating, that, and I drafted the language. It was a bit refined by the time it reached the top, but basically, and I'll read the whole lot of it. The policy planning paper of 21st of July 1971 argued that there was cause for concern whether our alliance with the United States can protect us at every step. The American alliance in a changing power balance will mean less to us than it has in the past. If anything, this argument has been strengthened by recent United States actions and America's failure to consult us on issues of primary importance to Australia. Back then, it was in relation to America's moves to normalize relations with the People's Republic of China.
Yeah, Kissinger visits.
They kept us completely in the dark.
Mm.
But that could apply equally to the way that the United States abandoned us in the field in Afghanistan. It did not consult us at all about its intention to withdraw, nor the modalities of the withdrawal, and we were left scrambling. And so the policy paper went on to say, accordingly, we shall need now more than ever to formulate independent policies based on Australia's national interests and those of our near neighbours that will enable us to react quickly to developments in United States policy towards China. We cannot react quickly to changes or developments in United States policy towards China because, as Kurt Campbell said when the AUKUS arrangement was announced, America has locked us into the United States strategic policy in the Indo-Pacific for the next 40 years at least. So my answer to the question is it's extraordinarily difficult for Australia to extricate itself from US dominance.
Right.
We might move on because we'd be running out of time. Move on to.
We can keep going as long as you can keep going today.
Well, I was thinking that I can't think there's not many other comments I want to make on Petullo's article because it basically makes me feel ill. But I think it is significant that in talking about China today's China, he finds it necessary to post a picture of Chairman Mao.
Yep. Well, on the next page, we've got this one.
Yes, so, but I think that talking about China, the China of Mao's day is not remotely similar to today's China.
No.
I was there in 1974 till 1976. Mao was just still alive. He died in 1976.
Yeah.
China was extraordinarily backward still, economically and socially and politically. It was still struggling. There was many countervailing forces against which the Chinese Communist Party was at loggerheads. There were what was politely called fissiparous tendencies even within the Chinese Communist Party. Whereas today, China has achieved a remarkable amount of both political and social cohesion and has advanced and has done so by conscientiously implementing its policy commitment to improving the welfare of the people. It is not pure sort of political propaganda when the government and the party insists that its prime directive is to enhance the welfare of the people. It has
Correct.
proved it, of course, in successfully lifting 800 million people out of poverty, successfully building a remarkably prosperous middle class. And I can't understand why Pizzullo talks about, at one point he talks about the middle class trap or some such thing.
Yeah, apparently I live in that middle class trap. I'm quite happy with it, but so is my wife, who is Chinese.
And I can't find it now, but the rise of the Chinese middle class is almost directly mirroring the collapse of the United States middle class.
Correct. Yes.
Most of the United States middle class has fallen into what is technically poverty, in that they're basically living from paycheck to paycheck and living on their credit cards. The number of the proportion of the population in the US which is actually below the poverty line has significantly increased. China's average take-home pay for Chinese workers has doubled, and in the United States it has not increased at all since the New Deal back in Roosevelt's day. So to argue that there's somehow China has a weakness with regard to the middle class, I find quite strange.
I've got one statement from Pizzullo's article here that I'd like to read. I read this to my wife this morning, and my wife speaks excellent English, and she said, "What the hell is this guy talking about?" But he describes China as a regime that is both party and state, that much is true, which is obsessed with regime security and domestic control, and which mobilizes the economy and the population in the service of a constant state of aggressive domestic and external struggle. And I looked at that and thought, which China is he talking about? I cannot see any domestic struggle going on here. There's certainly no external struggle. China is dealing very happily with 3/4 of the world. 151 countries, I think, now have signed up to the Belt and Road Initiative. A couple have dropped out, notably Italy.
It's 160.
Oh, is it now 160? And there are only 194 countries in the world.
Yeah.
Wow.
So China deals very amicably, and Pizzullo keeps talking about China having to deal amicably with the rest of the world. China is dealing very amicably with most of the rest of the world, apart from Western Europe and the United States, and to a lesser extent Australia. China is trying terribly hard to deal with us amicably, but we keep putting obstacles in their path, like this article by Pizzullo. It says, I noted that same sentence, Jerry, the obsessed with regime security. It is not at all surprising, given that the West is trying to destroy it and has declared its intention to do so. The United States certainly has.
Well, Pizzullo in the next page goes on to do exactly that. The West should have as its objective the structural creation of new conditions and a different future. What's he talking about there? That's called regime change, and that's called interference in a sovereign nation, which is contrary to the UN Charter.
Oh, yes, but he says that China should renounce interference in other countries, which I find quite amusing, given the extent to which the United States interferes in countries all around the world. It successfully overthrew 25 democratically elected governments since the Second World War.
Only 25.
And has invaded countless number of countries, without any legal authorization to do so. I mean, talk about illegal invasions. The United States is the past master at it. That was sentence you referred to, that it should have as its objective the structural creation of new conditions and a different future. China would be a respected leading participant in a revitalized liberal economic and security order. That is tantamount to saying that China should agree to be subservient to the West.
Correct.
Which,
but
of course,
then it goes on in the same paragraph to say that if they did this, China could have some critical planetary issues such as climate change, which China is leading now, artificial intelligence, which China is leading now, poverty, which China has quite clearly led the world in the removal of, global financial stability, which China has now, pandemic prevention, which China exemplified in the last pandemic. So pretty much everything that he says China needs to contribute to,
China's doing, has been doing, and is doing successfully.
Yeah.
It's like on the climate change issue, of course, it is carefully kept out of the consciousness of Western minds that China has reforested areas of its territory larger than many Western European countries.
Larger than France and Spain.
It leads the world in the development of solar energy. Very significantly, of course, it leads the world in the development of and production of electronic vehicles. Which, much to the dismay of Western Europe, who believe that China should be prevented from selling its electric vehicles to much of the world because they are more affordable than the European product. Which, of course...
So we had Janet Yellen complaining about China subsidizing, and in the same paragraph saying, we've invested billions into our EVs and batteries, and that we're not going to give these investments away to China's subsidies. What's the difference? America has invested billions. China has invested billions.
Yes, well, the Inflation Reduction Act, it was called, which is the legal instrument passed by Congress to channel subsidies and support to American industry. Is a sort of archetypical process of subsidizing industry. And of course, applying 100%, I think it's now 100% tariff against Chinese vehicles in the US, and the EU has decided to increase tariffs on Chinese vehicles to 45%, much to the dismay of key European vehicle manufacturers,
VW, Mercedes-Benz,
who have companies or have factories producing European branded vehicles in China. So if those tariffs are applied across the board to Chinese manufactured vehicles, it will in fact heavily hit European brands who have established their factories in China. And why did they establish their factories in China? Because it was more cheaper and more profitable for them to do so.
And China has the supply chains. It has a very large pool of very good engineers now, and it's not factory workers anymore. Those factories aren't staffed by cheap labor. They are incredible. I don't know if you've seen all of the factories in China now making cars are robotic factories.
where was it also? Where did he say it? In regard to that particular point, again, I think I regard this as a very supercilious and arrogant statement, and shows, again, enormous ignorance. He insists on his 14 points that China should improve the business climate in China so that foreign businesses can assist China with its economic transformation in areas such as decarbonization, clean energy, digital services, health, and aging. As we've
I think you
mentioned,
just needed to make
China
an extra
leads the
point
world-
because you'd run
China
out.
leads the world in clean energy. China has done a quite remarkable job in environmental protection in terms of cleaning up atmospheric pollution.
Yes, and you've been to China recently, and you know that I live here. I look out. I mean, it's been raining for the last 6 weeks, but it's clean rain. It used to be dirty rain.
It's not acid
clean
rain.
It's not acid rain. No. I cycled home yesterday from my in-laws' place for 20 kilometers in very, very heavy rain, and arrived home with a nice clean bike. It's very unusual.
Whereas if I drive my car in the rain in Melbourne, it ends up being coated in mud.
Exactly. So we do have blue skies. We do have clear skies back.
And of course,
okay,
the final demand in that particular demand is that is the removal of the Chinese Communist Party, which it incorrectly labels the CCP. The Communist Party of China is the correct title.
CPC, correct.
But he says the removal of the party from much of China's economic life.
Wow. So, in other words, he wants regime change.
Well, no, he just wants that statement. It doesn't necessarily mean that change the regime, but it's just basically this whole what's the word? Discredited American notion that of small government, that government should not interfere in the economy of the country, that government should not have any role in banking and investment policy, that government should not have any role in industry or in trade or any other aspect of the economic life of the country.
So he's talking about unfettered capitalism, which is exactly the thing that's driving their middle class into their poverty class right now.
Yes, exactly. And but the thing is, of course, that the Chinese Party, the Communist Party of China, has in fact removed itself from a very significant proportion of economic life in China. There's a great deal of private enterprise, very successful private enterprise in China. And it's this hybrid combination of government control over key aspects of the economy and the unfettered activity of private enterprise that has really contributed to China's success. And that takes me back to the point of why China is so different from what was under Mao. In Chairman Mao's time, there was no private enterprise. And all activity, including farming activity, had to be geared to the national planning objectives. And there was no incentive for anybody, rural or urban, to attempt to produce anything that went beyond the targets set in the national plan.
Which was stymieing development for sure. There was an interesting comment at the end of the two sessions about 18 months ago where Xi Jinping made his closing speech, and he said that for the first time ever, private enterprise has overtaken the government, the official enterprise. It was 52%, and he did say the plan is to increase that. So yes, exactly what you suggest. They're gonna keep control, so it's not unfettered, but they are allowing and have allowed great expansion of private industry.
Yeah, and so another of his demands, of course, was that China should rescind or reverse security laws that require businesses to support Chinese intelligence interests.
Mm.
Um, the US Patriot Act and a great deal of subsequent legislation relating to surveillance and intelligence in the United States,
Mm-hmm.
particularly the invasive extent of government surveillance in the United States, as revealed by Edward Snowden, uh, makes the Chinese use of surveillance pale into insignificance. Um, and I had a personal experience of this just on Monday, yesterday, here in Australia. I took a friend to the airport who was catching a flight. I used my credit card once only to enter the car park at the airport. As soon as I walked into the terminal, I got a message from DFAT saying, contemplating overseas travel, please consult our travel advisories for 175 different countries. And
Wow.
my immediate reaction was, how did DFAT know that I was in the airport within a minute of my walking in there? And
One of two ways.
the answer is, of course, the geostationing device on my phone
Mm-hmm.
indicates where I am at any particular moment, or where my phone is. Um,
That much is true, but why is that important? I mean,
and
it's important to DFAT.
why does it makes me realize that the geostationing information of every individual is available to and is being looked at by the Department of Foreign Affairs.
And who else?
And of course, then it must be also being looked at by ASIO and our security intelligence system. But
Mm-hmm.
I found that quite disturbing that I could be pinpointed within a few minutes of me arriving at a certain place in that way. So,
Mm.
um, talking about or challenging China's use of surveillance and intelligence requirements and so on is very much the pot calling the kettle black.
Well, the interesting thing about it, John, is that I've never yet met a Chinese person who resents it. It provides for an extremely safe living environment. We can walk around at night quite safely. We can go shopping without worrying about robberies. There are these parcel delivery places everywhere, and they don't get raided, and they don't get robbed, they don't get burgled.
Because there's
Street
a
crime.
camera there.
Yeah, because the government has done something. First of all, people who do street crime, robberies, burglaries, they don't do that because they want to do it. They do that because they're broke, they're poor, they have no choice. There's a lot less of those people here in China. And that's one big factor. The other is that you're almost guaranteed to get caught because of the surveillance system.
Yeah.
But in Australia, they have the surveillance system, but it's used in a different way. It's used to manage you. And I often say this about China. They do manage the population. There is no question about that. But in the West, they profit from our misbehavior. In China, they don't.
Hmm.
In the West, they're profiting from our misbehavior. They're using this surveillance system to profit from it. And in China, they're using it to manage what we do and how we do it.
Well, they don't only profit from misbehavior, but they profit from perfectly normal behavior because uh, the information that is gathered is sold to commercial companies to enable them to target advertising for their products.
Yep.
So, you know, if I attend the opera, then I immediately find that I'm being targeted by commercial entities endeavoring to sell me things that are related to my interest in opera or
Mm.
whatever it
Mm.
is. So you're quite right. way the surveillance system manages the population is to manage the population for greater profit for commercial companies.
Yes. Yeah.
Another one of his demands is that China should stop using economic linkages as political weapons, and that it should abide by international trade rules. Well, again, the country par excellence that uses economic linkages as a political weapon, of course, is the United States, which has sanctioned dozens of countries around the world. And economic sanctions are very damaging to the economies of countries like Cuba that have been under sanction since
70 years. Yeah.
Several, like, was it 4
It's
decades?
over 70 years.
70 years.
Yeah.
They're harmful to Iran, which has really struggled with the health system because of the blockage of provision of medicines and so on. Which they've now, I think, been able to circumvent because they're able to get far more medical supplies from both India and China. But when I was in Tehran, my secretary developed an extraordinarily painful problem in her hip. She fainted every time she stood up with pain. And we took her to hospital. The medical professionals in Iran were very, very good. The standard of hygiene in the hospitals was not so good, again, because supplies of hygienic equipment were basically sanctioned out. So I said to the doctor, look, do everything you need to do short of any invasive procedure, because I'm concerned about the risk of further infection. So one of the team said to me, I know what she's got. She's got brucellosis of the sacroiliac. And the other doctors said, oh, don't be stupid, that's a cow's disease. And he insisted that that's what it was. And I said, well, what do you need to treat it? And he gave me the name of the drug, of the medicine that was necessary. And I said, well, we have our diplomatic courier coming with the diplomatic bag through Zurich. I shall instruct her to get a supply. And I said, and in payment for the work, how much would you need to have on hand in addition to what you use for treating my secretary? And he told me, and I said, okay, well, we'll buy that you can keep in your stocks, and we'll see how it works. So it duly arrived, it was duly administered, and within 2 days, she was up and about and walking, and was fine. And it was definitely what he said it was. But he would not have been able to treat it other than getting
an ambassadorial
brought in, because there was no supply of that particular medicine anywhere in Iran, because it had been sanctioned out. So the use of economic or trade leverages to sanction countries, no country beats the United States, and certainly not China.
And they know how to hurt the individuals too, in order to bring about the regime change that they're looking for.
And he talks about China has benefited by being granted membership of the WTO, the World Trade Organization, on the understanding that it would not engage in coercive and predatory practices. And of course, that's a reference, of course, to the so-called economic coercion of Australia by the banning of wine and lobsters and timber and barley and so on, which has been portrayed as economic coercion to gain political advantages, and has never acknowledged that that followed 7 years of anti-dumping measures that Australia took against China, and which China complained to the World Trade Organization. It took formal complaints against Australia and its anti-dumping practices to the WTO, and in fact got favourable rulings in favour of China and against Australia from the WTO, which Australia then proceeded to ignore.
Yeah, because they couldn't be appealed against because the US have refused
The tribunal had been stymied by the United States.
Yes.
That was what China did with regard to Australia's exports to China, carefully selected so that it would not, in fact, impact the overall trade balance. In fact, during the imposition of the so-called economic coercion, Australia's overall trade with China increased. It did not decrease.
By 9%.
Yeah. So
yeah.
It was a tit-for-tat measure, more than an attempt to coerce Australia into adopting a different political position with regard to China. Likewise, the blocking of Huawei, which was a very belligerent move by Australia, which adduced security concerns as the reason for blocking Huawei's investment in the development of Australia's 5G. And it was demonstrated by, amongst others, Germany, that those concerns could be easily addressed by technological solutions rather than by simply banning it outright. And of course, Australia took it one step further by very actively seeking to persuade other countries to ban Huawei.
Yes, which the UK did.
Which the UK did.
The UK had to retract and go back.
At enormous cost to itself, because it had already incorporated Huawei into its systems and had to rip the whole lot out. But the point is that that was an economically aggressive move by Australia against China, to which China did not really react in like fashion at all. And likewise, I think the what's the word again? It's escaping me. The propaganda campaign in Australia to demonize China's participation in educational and cultural activity in Australia was
the Confucian centers.
Again, completely unwarranted. That it was basically attacking activities that were comparable to the activities undertaken by the British Institute or the Alliance Française or the Goethe Institute or any other such cultural organizations from other countries that freely operate in Australia.
I used to work for the British Council here in China. I know how they operate.
It was again a propaganda process of singling out China and making it appear to be engaged in something nefarious, which it certainly wasn't. And of course, one of the consequences of that was to significantly increase the demonization of students from China and the demonization of Chinese citizens of Australia.
Again, ASPI were responsible for that. It was another thing. It was an article written by a guy called Alex Josky, who at the time he wrote it was 20 years old and considered an expert on China.
Yeah, where did he get his expertise from? Since he had never even visited China.
Oh, no, he was born, I think he was born in China with a Chinese mother. He's educated in Taiwan, but his father was with the Australian embassy. His mother was Chinese. He speaks fluent Chinese. He's a half Chinese kid, but that's what he is. I mean, that's he probably, I'm guessing, because I don't know, as his father was in the embassy, it's almost certain he went to an international school. And I very much doubt he lived in the general community in China like I do. Walk outside of my house, it's China.
Yeah, was he there at an age where he could actually?
I think he was there till he was 8.
From the experience, I mean, my children were with me in China. They were 2 and 4 years old when we went there.
Yeah.
Or actually slightly younger. They both learned to speak fluent Chinese. In fact, my younger daughter Catherine had a really beautiful accent. Everybody admired the way she spoke Chinese, but neither of them retained anything very much from the experience. Certainly nothing that would make them experts on China.
No.
So,
well, that's what ASPI are presenting as expertise on China. Yeah. Somebody who was born here, lived here until he was 8, and then moved back to Australia, and then went to university in Taiwan, but was still only a 20-year-old ungraduated college student when he wrote the paper. Was called Picking Flowers and Making Honey, and it caused the Australian government and the US government to change their policy on Chinese students about the level of trust. So that was interesting. Let's just before, because we're at the 90-minute mark, let's I'll just put this. Yeah, we are. It's been great so far. I'm going to put the strategist, the challenge. I'll put the link into the description after we finish the chat. And we're going to move off this now to discuss for a short period of time, because this article was produced by a disgraced former government official in order to put some pressure, I think, on the meeting. Premier Li was in Australia from the 15th to the 18th. 15th. Yeah, 15th, 18th. He's left Australia now, I think, or is leaving today. Now, what? He has left, has he? I've been busy this morning. He went to Perth today, I think. Yeah.
Perth is on now.
Right.
And so any kind of joint press statement or joint press conference or official formal readout of the visit has been explicitly withheld until after the visit to Australia.
No, there is one. Let me just see if I've got it open here. There is one, and it was released yesterday. Let me just see if I can find it.
Well, according to the article that I have read, it said that details would be not released until after
he's finished. Well, the Prime Minister's office on the 17th of June, yesterday, released a statement on joint outcomes of the Australia-China annual leaders meeting, which is a slightly different thing. It's it was on the meeting rather than on the visit. Anyway, we've had positive news about pandas. We've had positive news about visas.
I think the simplest thing is to just quickly read the summary of the outcomes of the visit so far, which actually appeared in the Australian Financial Review, but it's obviously informed from official sources. And it says that Australia and China have vowed to improve military-to-military lines of communication, including a new maritime affairs dialogue to avoid dangerous confrontations at sea. That Australian tourists will enjoy visa-free entry to China, apparently for 15 days.
15 days, yes.
Business people will be able to receive multiple entry visas.
5 years.
And the two leaders pledged to strengthen the free trade agreement, which is one of the things that Patsullo seemed to be arguing against.
Chafta.
And they also announced a revamped economic strategic dialogue, which would provide avenues to address trade disputes and ensure a non-discriminatory business environment, which the author of the Fin Review says was a swipe by Premier Li at what Beijing alleges is unfair curbs on Chinese foreign investment.
Yes, the
But
Foreign
of course,
Investment Review
it is
Board
also,
just...
it's also clearly doing what Pizzullo argues for, which is a non-discriminatory business environment in China for Australian businesses,
which
which is
they
something
apparently have.
that Li Chang is promising. So he's fulfilling one of the things that
Pizzullo wanted.
said he should do.
Is there more? There's something on education as well. They were going to improve it because education seems to have slid back a little bit. Chinese students are not coming to Australia as much.
Yes, and that's not surprising.
No.
Of course, the question of Albanese confirmed that he had raised the recent near misses between Australian and Chinese militaries operating in the region. The first question that arises, of course, is why are Australian militaries operating in China's region?
In the Yellow Sea.
In the Yellow Sea, and the corner of the Yellow Sea they were operating in was quite clearly within both probably China's economic zone and North Korea's exclusive economic zone. And contrary to assertions that I've seen, the United Nations Convention on the Law of the Sea explicitly excludes military incursions into another country's exclusive economic zone without the permission of the country concerned. So Australia is intruding into essentially Chinese waters. China is reacting not in dangerous and unprofessional ways. The warning flares that they dropped in front of the helicopter from HMAS Hobart were in strict conformity with the Federal Aviation Administration's rules regarding steps to be taken to warn military aircraft away from a certain area. This brings us back, of course, also to the question of the One China policy and Taiwan. Every time Australia sails up the Taiwan Strait, we are in fact intruding not in China's economic zone, but in China's territorial waters, because the water between the mainland and Taiwan, if we abide by our legal obligation to consider Taiwan as an integral part of China, sailing between Taiwan and the mainland is an intrusion into territorial waters of China.
A military intrusion,
and which is, of course, a military incursion, and which could be interpreted as an aggressive act. China has never treated it as such, and it would not surprise me if at some stage in the future it decided it should do so. But
it'd be interesting to see what would happen if China sent ships, because it's got aircraft carriers now. It could do this. It could send those ships down into between Tasmania and Victoria. I wonder how that would be responded to.
Well, we saw the reaction to one single Chinese destroyer sailing through the Torres Strait some time ago. And it makes it pretty obvious that Australia has conniptions anytime anybody comes even close to our 200-mile economic zone limit, let alone coming close to our 20-mile territorial waters limit.
Which is where Australia seems to be a lot of the time right now.
And
Do you think? do you think that the positive things that you've just mentioned there, which are listed in the Australian Financial Review, do you think that the reality will match that rhetoric? Do you think that Australia and China will now move forward with more confidence, with a better footing, more stability, more freedom from the Foreign Investment Review Board in order to do stuff? Do you think that the future is more positive, or do you think they just? I spoke to Warwick Powell yesterday, and he said they're just kicking the can down the road. Nothing will change. What's your view?
Well, to some extent, I think he's right. The outcomes of the Li Chang visit on paper are definitely an improvement. Certainly the language now being used by Prime Minister Albanese is not reading from the United States playbook.
Right.
It departed significantly from it. I think the decision to have sort of two-star, they call them two-star ranked officers engaging in defence dialogue, defence coordination dialogue, and defence strategic dialogue, and convening an initial session of a bilateral maritime affairs dialogue. All of those things are good things, and they will, I think, enable a mechanism for defusing particular issues or events. And the commitment to continue and expand political dialogue, I think, is very positive. Some journalists asked Mr. Albanese whether the Chinese leadership can be trusted. His answer was, I have had constructive discussions with Premier Li, and those discussions have produced results. I think it would be very helpful if Mr. Albanese abided by the position he adopted with regard to Mr. Sogavare when he was asked the same question, and said that he would take another nation's leader at their word.
Right. Until proven otherwise. But yeah, China hasn't proven otherwise yet. What do you think the Americans will do?
I think the decision to enhance and reinforce the free trade agreement is good. I think the commitment to the comprehensive strategic partnership agreement is good. I don't know how America would react to that. It's quite clear that to answer the question that was asked before, what little can Australia do to get out from under US dominance? These are examples of the sorts of things that we can do as a gradual process. But how long it will last, I don't know. I mean, we've even got the leader of the opposition, Peter Dutton, who a few years ago was virtually declaring war on China. And
greatest anti-China hawk.
War is inevitable, and that Australia would have to rush to the defence of Taiwan when China attacked, etc., etc. Has also said citizens across both of our countries share aspirations for peace and prosperity. In pursuit of those aspirations, we have a responsibility to ensure that all engagements between our two countries are conducted with due care. So, again, possibly a motherhood statement, but certainly a great improvement on his previous attitude.
Yes, so, if the rhetoric matches the reality, or the reality later matches the rhetoric, I see this very positively. But I'm along the same views as Warwick was yesterday, 2 days ago when I talked to him.
I think
kicking the can.
I think the justification for that view, that rather pessimistic view,
Mm-hmm.
is seen in things like the announcement at the same time as Li Qiang's visit that Britain, the United States, under AUKUS, have created a one-stop shop for the development and they've established a joint venture capable of covering every aspect of the production of nuclear-powered submarines, from design to disposal, and is one of the biggest business deals yet to support Australia's AUKUS ambitions. So, and that it is Huntington Ingalls Industries in the United States which designs and builds and maintains the Virginia-class submarines, and Babcock in the UK, which is responsible for sustaining the UK's nuclear-powered submarines. They are now in a joint venture to build in Adelaide the Australian SSN AUKUS. That's clearly a doubling down on the whole idea of AUKUS, which is quite explicitly directed towards defending Australia from the China threat. So it's definitely against China. Also, just today, I saw that under AUKUS, attempts are being made to establish a new radar centre in Wales, in the UK, to operate US, UK, Australia space surveillance and with a view to enhancing the warfighting capabilities of the trilateral alliance. So with that sort of thing going on at the same time as the friendly rhetoric that we've seen emerging from the Li Chang visit, I'm not particularly hopeful that the rhetoric will actually bear fruit in many concrete ways. Once again, of course, we've seen the Chinese essentially making all the concessions. They've rescinded all their bans, almost all of their bans on Australian exports. I think lobsters is still waiting in the wings, but all the rest, virtually unilaterally, we haven't done anything to alter our position with regard to anti-dumping measures against cheap Chinese imports. So, and the further demand for more concessions from China with regard to the incarceration of Yang Henjun, the former Chinese intelligence officer who effectively breached the equivalent of the Official Secrets Act, which in Australia, a breach of the Official Secrets Act results in extremely severe punishment.
Yes. He was sentenced to death, but that's suspended. What that means in China is that he'll probably serve a minimum of 11 years.
Yes, exactly.
The death sentence is commuted after 2 years, and then there's a 9-year minimum for life. Now, if he behaves himself, in 11 years' time, he'll be home again. But it's a mistaken belief that this guy is an Australian author. He's a Chinese member of the Ministry of State Security who wrote books about his life in China in their secret service. It's not James Bond we're talking. This is not fiction. He was writing the reality of Chinese secret service.
Yeah,
and therefore China has sentenced him.
And revealing much about the Chinese secret service and its systems, which in Australia is a crime. A very serious crime.
Every country, I think, is a crime. I mean, there's not many countries that don't have that kind of Official Secrets Act type thing.
Well, America, again, we can look at America and what they're doing to Julian Assange, who did not commit the crime of which Yang Henjun has been found guilty. Assange did not engage in any infiltration of the United States Secret Service at all.
No.
He was simply given documentary material by someone who did breach their obligations under their the equivalent of the Official Secrets Act.
Yeah.
What was her name?
Chelsea Manning.
Chelsea Manning.
Yeah.
Chelsea Manning simply copied and handed over to Julian all these incriminating documents revealing US war crimes, particularly in Iraq, including the murder of Reuters journalists.
Yes.
Yet it's Julian Assange who's being murdered
slowly
but surely by the system.
There's a very interesting question just come up, John. I'm going to see your reaction to this one. Oh, hang on, not that one. This one. I thought you'd like that.
Yeah, I think the short answer to that is yes. My much lamented late father-in-law once described to me the role of an ambassador as an honest man sent abroad to lie for his country.
And he was an ambassador.
He was Australia's most important ambassador. He was ambassador to Washington for 6 years, and then became Australia's top diplomat in the sense that he was, in fact, the head of the Department of Foreign Affairs. Right. And I must say, he was very good at his job. And I learned a great deal from him. But the role of an ambassador or diplomatic representative, even at a lower level, is to be the eyes and the ears and the mouthpiece of his government. And our job was basically to observe and report on political, economic, social, cultural, and other developments in the country to which we were appointed. So my job in Iran, for instance, was to keep my eyes and ears open, to observe all open source, and if I could actually become privy to any secret source of information about Iran and its government and its policies, I was obligated to report that back to Canberra. So, yes, I would not disagree with Black Sun. All ambassadors are, in fact, some kind of espionage agents, in that our job is to observe and assess and analyse everything that's going on in the country that we're appointed to and report it to Canberra. And of course, in reverse, we are provided with instructions to represent to the government of the country we're appointed to the views and understandings and analyses of our government with regard to that country's policies.
So not necessarily the views of the government, but the views the government want your country to understand are your views. So you may not be telling the whole truth when you're an ambassador.
I have to truthfully tell what I'm instructed to tell. Whether that is the whole truth about my country and its activities, of course, is another question. There's a great deal, of course, that in the performance of our duties that we have to keep secret.
Of course.
And that is why other countries have espionage systems, because they want to find out what it is we're keeping secret from them, because it may affect them quite seriously. And certainly will inform the way in which they devise their policies towards us or towards any issues in which we are concerned internationally. And of course, there were several occasions on which that became clear to me while I was in Tehran. And we had to sometimes move quite quickly and adroitly to counteract the result of the fact that the Iranians had learned something that we didn't want them to know about. But that's par for the course. That's normal everyday activity. It's not nefarious. It's not illegitimate in any way. It's all countries practice diplomacy pretty much the same way, including China.
So. On a different note, you must sometimes look at the media and say, when you see Nicholas Burns in China, how do you think he's doing? He's in the community that I know, he's widely despised, the American ambassador to China.
I haven't really been following any of his activity in detail. I'm interested that you report that he is widely despised.
Amongst the community that I mix with.
Yeah, I don't have any contact these days with any official Australian representatives in Beijing, so I don't know what their private opinions about him might be. But I'm personally rather scathing about the United States policy towards China anyway.
The whole policy, not just the ambassador. Okay, we're just about to reach 2 hours, John, and I know that you have a life over there. My life is online here, so I'm all right. But I think, unless there's anything else you want to add, we should think about wrapping this up now. 2 hours into it is a good long day for us.
Yes, it is. There is a great deal more that I could say, particularly with regard to details in Pizzullo's article, but that might be for another day. When we see a little bit more of the wash-up from Li Qiang's visit, we'll have to wait until after he has left Western Australia.
Maybe after tomorrow,
There are interesting things happening with Tianqi, the Chinese company that has invested in lithium processing.
And they've been told to sell their investments.
No, they haven't. They have not been.
Right. Okay. Not that one. Okay.
The Chinese investor in Queensland was forced to disinvest to a minority interest in Queensland, but no, Tianqi has not. Li Chang and Prime Minister Albanese will be visiting Tianqi's plant as part of the visit to Western Australia. And, well, the most important thing there is Tianqi has said that it needs to be a level playing field. If other companies investing in lithium processing are to be given financial advantages by the Australian government, then Tianqi's plant should enjoy the same benefits as any other company. And interestingly, people such as Twiggy Forrest agrees with Tianqi.
He's planning a big solar panel factory, I think, isn't he?
I haven't seen that.
This is a few months ago. He announced this. He wants to build one of the world's biggest in Australia, which I think is great. And
it's a good idea. And it's about time we started to try to catch up with China in that field, because we have plenty of open spaces in which we could develop solar farms. So as long as we do it the same way China has done, and position the solar panels in such a way that it actually enhances the productive capacity of the land underneath them.
Yes, some of them do. Not all of them do, but some of them do.
Yes, but it's I think the biggest wind farm in China is in Xinjiang, and because the solar panels provide a degree of shade to the soil underneath, it has made the soil more productive.
Apparently, Twiggy's solar farm has failed and he's bailed out. I wasn't aware of that. I saw that he was going into it. So thanks, Shady Hazard, for that. some of the solar panels are sitting on fish ponds, and some of them are sitting on rice fields, and very, very interesting how they do it. And some of them are just sitting on desert. There's nothing else there. There's nothing else to do. I've cycled
Yes,
past these
the
things, and
ones that,
they're massive.
the ones that are sitting on desert, apparently there is grass growing underneath them, and there are local sheep and goats that can graze under the solar panels where there was no
Okay,
grass before.
that's
So,
fantastic. Well, but they've got to get water from somewhere, and I'm not sure
well,
where their water.
there is a great deal in desert areas. There's a great deal of nighttime condensation that falls as dew on the ground, but
Right.
of course, immediately the sun hits it, it evaporates. But if
So
it's
now it's
lying on,
evaporating and hitting the solar panel and then dropping down on the ground again.
well, if the sun hits it, but if the sun's not hitting it, it's just
Yeah.
lying on the ground and being absorbed by the soil.
Yeah. Believe me,
So
it's hot up there. I
yeah, but
cycled through
you
Taklamakan,
yes.
and
I
we had also
I've
the
yet
wind.
I've yet to fulfill my ambition to visit Xinjiang. I will continue pursuing that.
Do that.
Uh,
Yeah.
Anyway,
Yeah.
I think that's has covered most of the ground that we can cover today. I'll just have a quick check if there's any other really serious point. Only his other demand that China should improve the transparency of the Belt and Road Initiative, which he claims are investment schemes with poor outcomes which undermine sovereignty. My only reaction to that was basically, what about the IMF and World Bank
Yeah.
conditions on investments in countries which have sent many countries bankrupt and certainly have disrupted their social cohesion?
That's true, but it's also been quite widely debunked as well. It's not actually the case. China imposes no conditions other than repay the loan. The IMF and the World Bank impose all kinds of conditions.
Yes,
and that's the difference.
and the former Malaysian Prime Minister was speaking at length about the way in which he was able to successfully renegotiate the agreement with China to the very much increased advantage to Malaysia. So
Sri Lanka the same.
It is flexible. Well, Sri Lanka was effectively bailed out of becoming nationally bankrupt by China. China bailed it out because Sri Lanka could no longer afford to pay the interest on its loans from the IMF and still have dollars available to buy its essential needs, such as fuel. So, there's very little evidence anywhere that China has actually been bringing countries to their knees.
It's certainly not. It's not coercive in the way that Pazulo thinks it is. Yeah. But I wonder if he's. I mean, I can see that he is misinformed, but I wonder if he's willfully misinformed or people have misinformed him and he just doesn't know. Maybe he's just not smart enough to do the research himself.
Well, no, I think it's someone in his position who's claiming the level of authority or authoritative commentary that he's attempting to make has an obligation to be properly informed. I think he is willfully misinformed or willfully ignorant. I think. I think for me, one of the greatest crimes, one of the greatest evils, is willful ignorance. And just as a closing comment, this is the biggest problem in Australia. Most of the Australian population, with remarkably few exceptions, is willfully ignorant. When you attempt to enlighten them on issues that we've been talking about or on Israel-Gaza, they say, oh, I'm not interested in that. I don't want to know about it. And willful ignorance leads to disaster.
Yes. Yeah. And that is, I see that all the time. I have even friends and family in Australia saying to me, "Hey, Jerry, you can't be the only one who's right." I say, "Do your research. You'll find I'm right. Find out what's happening in China, really through China and through people that are in China. Don't ask the Washington experts. Ask
Yes,
people in China."
your friends and family in Australia who say that to you know much better than you do that China is bad and that you shouldn't be there. It's too dangerous.
That's very true. And I think we should leave it on that happy note that willful ignorance is a big problem inside of Australia, and people need to inform themselves. And thank goodness that we've got so many people here watching us who are informing themselves. So a
Great.
big thank you to all the people who watched, all the people who contributed, and a huge thank you again to you, John. And I believe I'm going to see you next month.
I very much hope so.
Yeah,
but it won't be next month. It's be this month.
This month?
Yeah, I'm leaving on
Okay.
Sunday.
Oh wow! Even faster than I thought. I'll check my dates and
23rd of June to the 18th of July.
Yeah, so it may be July that I see you rather than in June. Yeah, but if you get a chance, if you do get a chance to go to Xinjiang, Steve Weaver, who was just there last year, says, "Oh, yeah."
Yes.
So,
Thank you, Steve.